Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to a view replay that I've had knocking around on my hard drive for a while. I actually recorded this one ages and ages ago, probably a couple of months ago at this point, and then the video file's just been kind of sat tucked away in a folder where I had managed to forget about it. So, oops. But I'm finally getting around to recording it now, and well, this is a name that should be familiar to most of you by this point. This is Flying Elite, who plays on the Asian server. Now you might be wondering about the quite high proportion of APCR that Flying Elite is using, and I suspect it's because they were at the time going for some of the second round of personal missions. To be specific, it was Alliance Mission 15, which requires you to get a number of either first class masteries or ace tankers. So what I suspect Flying Elite has done is go into a vehicle they are very comfortable with, a vehicle they know that is quite strong still these days, even after multiple nerfs over the years, and they've loaded up their premium ammo, they've loaded up their premium food consumable, and they are just trying to do the best they can to get an ace tanker. Whether they succeed, well, I guess we shall find out. The irony is that apart from, I think, the T28 Prot and maybe like the upper front plate of the T34, they don't really need the APCR. I don't think he would have any difficulty penning anything else. The OI frontally, maybe, but 160 average pen with your AP, I think that would be good enough. Because it's not tremendously sloped. I'm just struggling to remember what the actual armor value is. It might be a bit on the close side actually. You might be relying on RNG rolls whether you're going to pen an OI frontally with the AP shell. So okay, maybe the APCR is the safe bet for something like the OI, but most other things, yeah, the AP is going to be sufficient. So even though this is a full down tier, the APCR is not actually that necessary, but of course you don't know that going into a game. When you hit that battle button, you've got no idea what kind of matchmaking you're going to get, what kind of opponents you're going to get. And so as Flying Elite was trying to get an ace tanker, he's absolutely thrown a bunch of credits at the screen and played it as safe as he can in order to maximize his potential. This is also a pretty good map for a machine like this because he's got the mobility, but he doesn't have the armor, and so having bush cover available is very, very useful. And this is possibly one of the best maps for bush cover these days. I mean, a lot of the older maps had bush cover drastically reduced, so I think some of them had it added back a bit over the years, but generally speaking, there's not that many maps that are friendly to weakly armoured tank destroyers, but this is definitely one of them. So he's able to use his mobility and make use of the turrets, which is a very, very useful feature on this machine. In fact, an extremely useful feature on any tank destroyer, and move around and try and help out his allies. Although he's not landed a lot of shots so far, he's only gotten 2 penning hits, and this doesn't carry mountains of ammo. It's got enough, but it is possible to run out in a Hellcat if you're missing a bit too much. There are quite a few tank destroyers on both teams also, you might notice. So what's happening is that, I mean, the enemy team is taking the initiative in the north at the moment, but they're pushing in and losing some forces. But Elite's team is losing more. So the enemy team does appear to have the upper hand right now. If he can stay alive though, and if he can have allies stay alive long enough to provide him with spotting, he should be able to continue to be quite effective. Although at the moment, I mean, they're aware they're getting hit from the south, so they are trying to take cover, these couple of tanks that are in render at the moment. So he can't just sit in one spot forever, because that's not going to really work out. He is getting a couple of opportunistic hits, but once they know where they're getting shot from, they do have cover available to them. It is a funny thing to me, by the way, that despite repeated nerfs over the years, the Hellcat is still really quite an effective tank destroyer. It's still a very good machine, and that's really in part just due to its nature. You know, it's just fast. This is how it was designed in real life. It was supposed to be fast, practically unarmoured, and to have a pretty decent amount of firepower. Although, of course, we forget, you know, in World of Tanks we are so used to seeing this with a 90mm that we forget in real life it was equipped with a 76mm. It was the M36 that had the 90mm. And it also amuses me that in War Thunder, when they introduced it, where of course it did have the 76mm, it was still highly effective, and I think it has also been nerfed several times in War Thunder since it was introduced as well. It's just the sheer speed of it allowing it to get around to different places on the map, which actually is almost more important in War Thunder, because the maps are generally bigger and generally are more, I don't want to say naturalistic exactly, but they have a different map design philosophy, and being able to get to the early cat positions is quite important, and machines like the Hellcat were able to do that very effectively. I think they increased the spawn cost. I don't think you could take it out as an initial vehicle anymore, but don't quote me on that. I've not got anything like as far as the Hellcat on my US Ground Forces lineup. I don't play a lot of War Thunder Ground Forces, but I do play a little bit. Anyway, enough about War Thunder. That's a totally different game. It's just, I don't know, it was just in my head about the War Thunder Hellcat, and so, you know, I thought, why not bring it up? Because there's not been a lot going on other than this now slow trading of forces. The enemy team have slowed their push a bit because, well, both teams are down to almost just tank destroyers. Tank destroyers generally have inferior view ranges, inferior armour, and inferior amounts of hit points. And people playing tank destroyers tend to like to just take more passive positions because, well, generally you have to. There's not a lot of tank destroyers you can get away with playing actively and getting in people's faces unless you are in with a group of allies. So it's come down to trying to outspot people, basically. But it's not just going to be entirely sitting in bushes, don't worry. We will get some zooming around as well. But for the time being, he's just waiting to see if he spots anybody and waiting to see if anybody gets spotted for him. Although, unfortunately, they have just lost their last spotting tank. I mean, I almost said last non-tank destroyer, but they do still have artillery. But yeah, the MT-25 got taken out by one of the defending enemy tank destroyers, and so we've come down to this situation where, yeah, nobody really wants to move. The enemy team does have one more arty, and they do have a medium tank left alive, but otherwise it's all tank destroyers. I think Flying Elite, if I had to guess, one of the reasons why he's taking this out is that he's got a good crew in it. So I think he's possibly got some spotting skills on this crew. Maybe it's even like a Brothers in Arms crew. Who knows? But certainly with the Cola and the binoculars, he's going to have a pretty respectable view range. And he's also got enough allies, crucially, that if he can spot things, he can rely potentially on other people shooting. He doesn't have to do it all himself. And as he's starting to run quite low on ammo, that's a good thing. This doesn't carry maybe huge amounts of ammunition compared to some other tank destroyers. So the T-3485 has pushed onto the cap, and although they have a bit of time to work with, they can't be too complacent because it's only about a minute and change. This T-28 Prot, however, they are far easier prey. We can see the Scorpion just managed to hit them, and then Flying Elite takes the chance and fires off around himself. He's almost up to, not almost up to anything, he's over 2,000 damage at this point. He's done a pretty reasonable amount considering the tiering. It's one of the reasons why this tank is strong for its tier. It gets that 90mm gun. As I've said, you know, real life, it didn't have that firepower. I suspect if it had in-game the 76mm, it would maybe be rather less popular than it is. But for some reason, Wargaming, way back in the mists of time, decided it was going to have a 90mm available as an upgrade, and that's just the gun everyone's always used on it. And having this amount of alpha at this tier on a turreted tank destroyer is pretty nice. I'm trying to think what else there is at this tier that's got a turret. And well, the Achilles is what, a 17-pounder gun? So that's less damage, although better penetration. What else is turreted? I can't remember offhand. There's not a huge number of turreted tank destroyers in the game anyway. So the last of the attacking tanks has been dealt with, and as we're down to the last couple of minutes, I mean, you know, we could sit and wait for things to happen, but no, it's time to get on the move. And he's not only found one tank destroyer, but one artillery. He's found both artilleries. I don't know where I was going with that thought, but yeah, he's only managed to kill one of them because he's run out of his armor-piercing ammo and was forced to rely on HE. Although if he'd aimed a bit more carefully and not relied on the auto-aim, he might have gotten the kill on that other artillery as well. So we skipped ahead a little bit to him finding the very last machine on the enemy team, this Udes, who was in the tree line behind the enemy cap circle, and the HE shells were more than enough to pen the very thin armour on that machine, and so he gets the final kill. With that, that's 4,030 damage done, with an additional 1,239 spotting damage, which was enough to get that ace tanker. So he was in fact successful in getting the Alliance 15 mission, and did so in a fairly decent style. Because he was bottom tier, because a lot of the tanks he was firing at were higher tier, he was able to easily place at the top of the team with almost 1,000 base XP better than the next best player, which was in fact an artillery player. So it's not that everybody else was doing exceptionally badly. I think it's just that he was doing very well. And it did look like it was tipping against them for a bit, but I think just due to the nature of the map, due to the fact that it came down to essentially tank destroyers versus tank destroyers, yeah, the people that were attacking then ended up at a disadvantage, and at that point the mobility was very useful for running around and hoovering up just the last couple of kills and the last bit of spotting damage. So maybe not the most exciting match overall, but it just goes to show that the Hellcat is still very potent, especially when you spam premium ammo and use the premium food consumable. But if you've got a specific reason for doing it, I guess it's not so bad, although I'm sure it had to be annoying being on the wrong end of that. But, you know, we've got changes to premium ammo coming up in the future at some point in World of Tanks, so stuff like that should be less annoying, but might not actually feel so. I don't know. I guess we'll see how it works out. So hopefully you've enjoyed this replay, and my apologies for leaving it so long, flying lead, but anyway, there we are. I got round to it eventually. If you enjoyed it, you can do all the usual things down underneath, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.